In the armory at Blackstone Military Training Grounds, a quiet maintenance worker was about to shatter every assumption. What started as routine weapon cleaning took a shocking turn when she came face to face with an 800-yard target that had humbled elite snipers. Elena Park wasn't your typical support staff member. For years, she had spent her childhood in the Alaskan wilderness with her grandfather, a decorated Vietnam marksman known for her uncanny stillness and precision with the rifle. When equipment shortages forced her onto the firing line as a space filler, she had no idea she was walking into a moment that would expose talents everyone had overlooked. Elena squeezed that trigger with muscle memory from forgotten mornings, achieving an X-ring center shot that would lead to whispered conversations, betting pools, and a direct challenge to the base's star shooter. What began as invisible maintenance work would become a complete transformation. The Blackstone Military Training Grounds would never be the same after the day a weapon cleaner became the sniper everyone was watching. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sky stretched like brushed steel above Blackstone Military Training Grounds, wisps of fog dancing between the firing lanes as the first shots cracked across the range. The air carried that distinctive scent of cordite mixed with dew-dampened earth, a smell that had become as familiar to Elena Park as her own breath over the past 6 months. This wasn't just any training facility. Blackstone had earned its reputation as the proving ground where elite snipers were forged and pretenders were broken. Veterans in tactical gear worth more than most people's cars moved with practiced confidence, their custom rifles gleaming under the pale sunrise. None of them paid attention to the woman in the faded maintenance coveralls who moved quietly through the armory, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, hands steady as she disassembled and cleaned each weapon with methodical precision. Why would they notice her? Elena was just another support staff member assigned to keep the rifles functioning and the ammunition sorted. Her role was purely logistical, invisible to the elite trainees who strode past in full combat gear, discussing ballistic coefficients and wind drift calculations in voices that carried the weight of absolute certainty. She adjusted the maintenance badge hanging crooked on her coveralls, taking in the meticulously organized armory around her. Rows of rifles stood in perfect formation, each one cleaned and calibrated to surgical precision. The wooden cleaning benches stretched in perfect lines, and through the windows she could see the distant targets catching the early light like silver coins. The crack of test shots echoed like scattered firecrackers, a rhythm she'd grown to find oddly comforting. Elena's hands moved with unconscious expertise as she field-stripped a bolt-action rifle, her fingers finding each component without conscious thought. The muscle memory ran deeper than her time at Blackstone. Much deeper. In these quiet moments, surrounded by the familiar weight and geometry of precision instruments, she couldn't help but remember mornings in the Alaskan wilderness with her grandfather, Henry Park. Breathe out halfway, then hold. The rifle is just pointing where your body already knows the bullet needs to go. She shook her head, pushing the memories aside. Those days were long past, buried under years of practical decisions and the steady routine of her current life. Here she was Elena, the maintenance tech, not the girl who could thread a bullet through a soda can at 300 yards using her grandfather's old hunting rifle. "Hey, Elena!" Private Jamie Torres appeared in the armory doorway, ammunition belt slung over one shoulder and a grin splitting their freckled face. "You missed quite the show out there. Rico just put 3 shots through the same hole at 600 yards. Kid's showing off again." Elena smiled, continuing her work on the rifle's bolt assembly. "Someone's got to keep his ego properly inflated." "Right?" Jamie laughed, dropping into a chair beside the cleaning bench. "Though I'll admit, watching him work is something else. It makes it look effortless." They paused, studying Elena's precise movements as she reassembled the weapon. "You know, I've always wondered."
Handle these things like you actually know what you're doing.
Ever think about trying out for the program yourself? The question hit closer to home than Elena cared to admit. She'd thought about it more than once, especially during the long nights when sleep eluded her, and she found herself remembering the satisfaction of watching targets fall under her grandfather's patient instruction. But thinking and doing were two different things entirely. "I'm happy where I am," she said, which wasn't entirely true, but wasn't entirely false either. Besides, they'd laugh me off the range. Would they, though? Jamie's voice carried a note of genuine curiosity. "I mean, you know these weapons better than most of the trainees do. And you've got that stillness about you, like nothing rattles you." Before Elena could respond, Lieutenant Grace Rowe's voice cut through the morning air from the armory's main entrance. "Torres, stop socializing and get those ammunition counts to Sergeant Miller. Park, I need to see you." Jamie scrambled to attention, shooting Elena a quick, sympathetic look before disappearing with military efficiency. Grace approached the cleaning bench, her expression businesslike but not unkind. As the logistics officer responsible for equipment allocation, she'd worked with Elena regularly over the past months and had developed a grudging respect for her thoroughness. "We've got a situation developing," Grace said without preamble. "Tomorrow's timed qualification drill. 3 of our primary rifles failed morning inspection, firing pin issues on 2, scope mount failure on the 3rd. The replacements won't arrive until after the drill window." Elena set down her cleaning rod, giving Grace her full attention. "How many shooters are we talking about?" 24 trainees, 21 functional rifles." Grace's mouth pressed into a thin line. "Command wants to maintain the schedule. They're talking about running the drill in waves, but that changes the conditions, affects the scoring." "What about the backup weapons?" "Already allocated. Grace paused, studying Elena with an expression that suggested she was weighing options. "There is one possibility, but it's unconventional." Elena waited, sensing something significant in the lieutenant's tone. "The drill is timed, not scored for accuracy. Officially, we just need bodies on the line to maintain proper spacing and safety protocols. You know the weapons, you know the range protocols. You could fill one of the positions." The suggestion hung in the air between them like a challenge neither woman had expected to voice. Elena felt her pulse quicken, a familiar mix of excitement and terror that she hadn't experienced in years. "Ma'am, I'm not qualified for—" "You're qualified to handle the equipment safely, which is all we technically need. No one expects you to actually compete. Just fill the space, follow the safety protocols, and keep the drill moving on schedule." Elena set down her cleaning rod, feeling the weight of opportunity and impossibility in equal measure. Through the window, she could see Rico Mendoza demonstrating his stance to a cluster of admiring trainees, his movements fluid and confident, and his position on the range as unquestioned as gravity itself. "Think about it," Grace said, already moving toward the door. "I need an answer by 1700. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that made distant targets shimmer like mirages. Elena stood at the edge of the firing line, clutching a rifle she'd cleaned and calibrated hundreds of times, but never fired on this range. Her coveralls had been replaced by borrowed BDUs that fit well enough, and the weight of the weapon felt foreign and familiar in her hands. Around her, 23 elite trainees made their final preparations with the casual confidence of thoroughbreds before a race. Rico Mendoza held court near the center of the line, regaling his audience with technical analysis of wind conditions and target specifications. His custom rifle caught the morning sun, every component selected and calibrated for maximum precision. "Just remember," Grace had said during the hasty briefing an hour earlier, "you're here to maintain proper spacing and follow safety protocols. No one expects you to hit anything. This is about keeping the drill on schedule." Master Sergeant Harlow approached the firing line with the measured stride of a man who'd seen everything the military had to offer and remained unimpressed by most of it. His weathered face carried the kind of authority that made even the cockiest trainees stand a little straighter. When his gaze fell on Elena, she saw surprise flicker across his features before settling into professional neutrality. "You're the maintenance tech," he said, not quite a question. "Yes, sir, Elena Park." Lieutenant Rowe briefed me on the situation. His eyes assessed her stance, her grip on the rifle, the way she held herself. "You're comfortable with that weapon?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Stay safe, follow commands, and try not to shoot anybody." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Other than that, just do your best to stay out of the way." He moved on down the line, offering last-minute adjustments and words of encouragement to the trainees. Elena found herself next to a tall, lanky soldier she didn't recognize, who glanced over with curious eyes. "Never seen you on the line before," he said quietly. "Equipment shortage," Elena replied, checking her safety one final time. "Ah, well, good luck. This target's a real bastard in these wind conditions." The target in question sat 800 yards downrange, a standard silhouette that looked impossibly small through the morning haze. Elena had watched trainees attempt this distance dozens of times from her position in the equipment tent. She'd seen the concentration on their faces, the careful adjustments for wind and elevation, the mixture of confidence and anxiety that preceded each shot. Now she was on the other side of that equation, and the perspective was dizzying. "Shooters to the line!" Harlow's voice cut through the morning air with parade ground authority. Elena settled into a prone position, the rifle's familiar weight distributing across her body as she found her natural point of aim. Muscle memory from countless hours in the Alaskan wilderness began to surface, her grandfather's patient voice echoing in her mind. "Don't fight the rifle. Let it settle where it wants to settle. Your job is to be still and squeeze straight back when everything aligns." "Ready on the right, ready on the left, ready on the firing line." The silence that followed felt absolute, 24 people breathing in synchronized anticipation. Elena's heart hammered against the ground, but her hands remained steady as she found her sight picture and began the familiar process of reading the wind. "Commence firing!" The first shots echoed across the range like thunder, a rolling crescendo of precision instruments announcing their deadly purpose. Elena watched the flags downrange, noting the subtle dance of fabric that told the story of wind speed and direction. 3 flags hung at different distances, each one providing crucial information about the invisible river of air her bullet would have to navigate. The wind was tricky this morning, gusting from the northwest at roughly 8 miles per hour at the firing line, but the middle flag suggested a crosswind component that would push her shot to the right. She adjusted her point of aim accordingly, remembering her grandfather's patient explanations about reading conditions. "The wind you feel on your face isn't the wind your bullet will feel halfway to the target," Henry Park's voice whispered from memory. "You have to read the whole story, not just the first chapter." To her right, Rico Mendoza fired with mechanical precision, his follow-through smooth and controlled. Even from her peripheral vision, she could see the confidence in his posture, the absolute certainty that his bullet would find its mark. The spotting scope operator called out his hit, a solid 8 at 2 o'clock, well within the scoring ring for this distance. Elena breathed out halfway and held, just as her grandfather had taught her in the stillness of Alaskan mornings, when the world held its breath between heartbeats. The crosshairs settled naturally on her chosen point of aim, and for a moment the weight of expectation and anxiety fell away entirely. In that moment of perfect stillness, she was 16 again, lying prone on a rocky outcrop while her grandfather watched patiently through his spotting scope. The target was a metal silhouette he'd placed at what seemed an impossible distance, and she'd complained that it was too far, too small, too difficult. "Distance is just distance," he'd said quietly. "The bullet doesn't know how far it's traveling. Your job is to point it in the right direction and get out of its way." Elena squeezed the trigger straight back, feeling the crisp break that indicated proper technique.
The rifle recoiled against her shoulder with familiar authority, and she rode the recoil up, settling back into position to observe her hit through the scope. X-ring center! The spotter's voice carried a note of surprise that made several trainees look over in confusion. Elena blinked, certain she'd misheard. The X-ring was the innermost scoring area, the bullseye within the bullseye that separated good shots from great ones. At 800 yards, in shifting wind conditions, hitting the X-ring required not just skill, but a significant measure of luck. "Confirm that call," Harlow's voice cut through the murmur of surprise. "Confirmed, Sergeant. X-ring center. Actually?" The spotter paused, consulting his measurement tools. "That's dead center mass. Might be a range record for this target in these conditions." The firing line fell silent, except for the whisper of wind through the flags. Elena felt 23 pairs of eyes turn toward her position, their expressions ranging from surprise to disbelief to something that might have been suspicion. Rico Mendoza had lifted his head from his scope entirely, staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Well, I'll be damned," the soldier next to her muttered. "Nice shot." Elena managed a small nod, her mind still processing what had just happened. The muscle memory had taken over completely, her body remembering lessons learned in the vast silence of the Alaskan wilderness, where her grandfather had taught her that shooting was less about force than it was about stillness, less about fighting the elements than learning to dance with them. "Cease fire. Make safe your weapons," Harlow's command cut through her reverie. As Elena engaged her safety and began the process of clearing her rifle, she caught sight of Harlow walking down the firing line toward her position. His expression was unreadable, but she could sense the weight of his attention like a physical presence. He stopped beside her position, accepting the spotting scope from his assistant and taking a long look downrange at her target. When he lowered the scope, his weathered face carried an expression of professional interest mixed with something that might have been respect. "Park," he said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears only. "Yes, sir, Sergeant?" "Where the hell did you learn to shoot like that?" The question hung in the morning air between them, loaded with implications that Elena wasn't sure she was ready to face. Around them, the other trainees continued their preparations for the next string of fire, but she could feel their attention like a subtle current, their previous indifference replaced with something far more complicated. In the distance, the flags continued their eternal dance, telling stories of wind and weather to anyone patient enough to read them. Elena looked out at the target that had seemed so impossibly far just minutes ago, and realized that her carefully maintained anonymity had just evaporated in the space of a single perfect shot. "My grandfather taught me," she said simply, because it was the truth, and because any other answer would require explanations she wasn't prepared to give. Harlow nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. "Well," he said finally, "I think we need to have a conversation." The armory felt different when Elena returned that afternoon. Word of her shot had spread through Blackstone with the efficiency of military gossip, transforming her from invisible maintenance staff into the subject of hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered a room. She tried to focus on her normal routine, checking serial numbers, inspecting firing pins, cataloging ammunition, but the familiar rhythm felt disrupted by the weight of attention she'd never asked for. "Lucky shot," Rico Mendoza's voice cut through the afternoon quiet like a blade. He stood in the armory doorway, still wearing his shooting jacket, his custom rifle case slung over his shoulder. "That's what everyone's saying, you know. Beginner's luck."
800 yards and shifting wind? Rico stepped into the armory, his presence filling the space with aggressive energy. "That's not luck. That's either skill or something else entirely." The implication hung in the air between them, ugly and accusatory. Elena finally looked up from her clipboard, meeting his stare with steady eyes. "Something else? Like what?" "Like maybe someone's been practicing where they shouldn't be. Maybe someone's been taking equipment out after hours." His voice carried the kind of casual malice that military hierarchies sometimes bred. Wouldn't be the first time support staff got ideas above their station. "You're suggesting I've been stealing weapons to practice illegally?" Elena's voice remained level, but something cold settled in her chest. That's a serious accusation, Rico. Just pointing out that miracles are pretty rare around here. He shifted his rifle case, the movement casual, but somehow threatening. Course, if you really do have that kind of natural talent, you won't mind proving it wasn't a fluke? Before Elena could respond, Master Sergeant Harlow appeared in the doorway behind Rico. His expression was carefully neutral, but Elena caught the subtle tension in his posture that suggested he'd heard at least part of the exchange. "Mendoza," Harlow said quietly, "don't you have equipment to clean?" Rico straightened to attention, his antagonistic demeanor instantly replaced by military bearing. "Yes, sir. Just congratulating Park on her shot." "I'm sure you were." Harlow's tone could have frozen steel. "Dismissed." After Rico left, Harlow entered the armory and closed the door behind him. He studied Elena for a long moment, his weathered face giving nothing away. "Take a seat," he said, gesturing to one of the maintenance stools. Elena complied, setting down her clipboard and waiting for whatever was coming. In her experience, conversations that began with closed doors rarely ended well for people in her position. "Tell me about your grandfather," Harlow said, surprising her. "Sir? You said he taught you to shoot. I want details. Military service, law enforcement, competitive shooting?" Elena hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "He was Army, served in Vietnam as a designated marksman. After his discharge, he went back to Alaska and lived off the grid mostly, hunting, trapping, that sort of thing." "And he taught you?" "Some, when I was young. The memories felt fragile, too precious to expose to this kind of scrutiny." Harlow nodded, pulling up another stool. 800-yard shot in variable wind. That's not basic safety training, Park. That's advanced marksmanship. So let me ask you again. What exactly did your grandfather teach you? The question felt like a test, though Elena wasn't sure what the correct answer might be. She decided on honesty, if only because lies seemed more dangerous at this point. "Everything," she said quietly. "Ballistics, wind reading, range estimation, breathing techniques." He said shooting was like any other skill. It required patience and practice. "We spent most weekends out in the wilderness when I was in high school." "Why didn't you pursue it? Military service? Competition?" "Life happened." The simple phrase carried years of complicated decisions. "College, career, family obligations. I drifted away from it." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Harlow was quiet for a moment, studying her with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "You realize what you did out there today changes things." "Sir?" "That shot wasn't luck, and we both know it, which means you've got skills that belong on the firing line, not the armory." He leaned forward slightly. "Question is, what do you want to do about it?" Before Elena could answer, the armory door opened, and Lieutenant Grace Rowe stepped inside, tablet in hand, an expression businesslike as usual. "Sergeant, I need to—" She stopped, taking in the scene. "Am I interrupting something?" "Just having a conversation about Park's performance today. Seems she's got some untapped potential." "Is that so?" "Well, that's interesting timing. I've got the after-action reports from today's drill. Park's shot is officially recorded as a range record for the 800-yard target in variable wind conditions." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. A range record meant her name would go into the official books, her performance compared against every elite trainee who'd attempted the target under similar conditions. There would be no hiding from this, no dismissing it as beginner's luck. "Furthermore," Grace continued, "I've had 3 instructors ask me about her background and availability for advanced training." Harlow looked at Elena with something that might have been approval. "Seems word is spreading beyond the trainee population." 20 minutes later, Elena found herself walking toward the mess hall in a daze, her mind still reeling from the conversation in the armory. Harlow had made it clear that she could return to her normal duties if she preferred, but he'd also outlined a path toward actual sniper training that seemed simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. "Elena!"
Jamie Torres caught up with her outside the mess hall, practically bouncing with excitement. "Holy shit! You're famous! Everyone's talking about your shot!" "Language, Torres," Elena said automatically, though she couldn't help smiling at her friend's enthusiasm. "Sorry, but seriously, 800 yards! And apparently it's a record?" Jamie fell into step beside her. "Why didn't you ever tell me you could shoot like that?" "Because I didn't know I still could," Elena replied honestly. "It's been years since I've done any serious shooting." "Well, muscle memory is a hell of a thing." Jamie grabbed her arm, stopping them both just outside the mess hall entrance. "So what happens now? Are you going to try for the sniper program?" The question that had been lurking at the edges of Elena's consciousness all afternoon finally demanded a direct answer. The logical part of her mind cataloged all the reasons why it would be a mistake. Her age, her lack of recent training, the inevitable conflict with trainees like Rico who'd been preparing for this their entire military careers. But there was another part of her, a part that had been dormant for years, that remembered the satisfaction of perfect shots and the quiet pride in her grandfather's eyes when she'd mastered a particularly difficult technique. "I don't know, honestly. Maybe." Jamie grinned. "Well, for what it's worth, I think you should go for it. Show these hotshots that there's more than one way to earn your place." The next 3 weeks blurred together in a haze of early mornings and aching muscles. True to his word, Master Sergeant Harlow had designed a series of progressively challenging exercises to test whether Elena's 800-yard shot represented genuine skill or an extraordinary fluke. The first test came at dawn on Tuesday, 600 yards in calm conditions. Elena's hands shook slightly as she settled into position, acutely aware of Harlow's presence beside the spotting scope. This time there was no crowd, no pressure from competing trainees, just her, the rifle, and a target that seemed to shimmer in the morning haze. "Take your time," Harlow said quietly. "This isn't about speed." Elena breathed out halfway and held, finding her natural point of aim just as her grandfather had taught her. The shot broke cleanly, and through her scope, she watched the impact appear just left of center, a solid 8 in the scoring ring. "Good," Harlow said simply. "Again." The second shot went slightly high, catching the 9 ring at 12 o'clock. The third found the 10 ring, and the fourth was nearly perfect, a 9 that missed the X ring by perhaps an inch. Over the following days, the distances increased. 700 yards in light wind, 750 in gusting conditions that had her reading flags and mirage like a meteorologist. Each session revealed new challenges and new opportunities for failure. At 800 yards, the distance of a record shot, Elena struggled. The conditions were different, the wind more complex, and the weight of expectations seemed to press down on her shoulders like a physical burden. Her first shot went wide, her second low. Harlow said nothing, simply marked her misses and waited for her to find her rhythm. "Don't force it," he said after her third miss. "The rifle will tell you when it's ready." Elena closed her eyes for a moment, pushing away thoughts of Rico's smirking face and the whispered conversations that followed her through the base. When she opened them again, the world seemed clearer somehow. She found her sight picture, read the wind, and squeezed the trigger with patient confidence. X-ring center. "There she is," Harlow murmured, making a note on his scorecard. The real test came on a Friday morning when he took her to the 1,000-yard line. Elena had never attempted this distance, not even with her grandfather in the vast openness of Alaska. The target looked impossibly small through her scope, a distant postage stamp wavering in the heat mirage. "This separates the good shooters from the great ones," Harlow explained as she settled into position. 1,000 yards is where technique meets instinct, where all the fundamentals have to work together perfectly. Elena's first shot missed entirely, sailing over the target and into the backstop beyond. The second went low, kicking up dirt 10 yards short. Frustration began to build, but Harlow's calm presence beside her kept her focused. "Tell me what you're seeing," he said. "Mirage is running left to right, but the flag at 600 is hanging limp." Elena studied the conditions downrange. "Wind at the target looks stronger than what I'm feeling here." "Good. What else?" "The target's dancing in the mirage. Hard to get a clean sight picture." She adjusted her position slightly, trying to find more stability. Breathe. Let your body settle. The mirage will still be there, but you can shoot through it if you're patient enough. The third shot found the edge of the scoring ring, a 7 at 4 o'clock. Elena felt a surge of satisfaction that had nothing to do with the score and everything to do with finally reaching the target at this impossible distance. Progress, Harlow said. We'll come back to this. As they walked back from the firing line, Elena realized that something fundamental had shifted over the past weeks. The rifle no longer felt foreign in her hands, and the complex calculations of wind and distance had begun to feel intuitive rather than academic. More importantly, she'd stopped apologizing for taking up space on the range. "Sergeant," she said as they reached the equipment shed, "I want to ask you something." "Shoot." "The sniper school qualification. When's the next one?" Harlow stopped walking and turned to face her fully. 6 weeks. Why? I want to try. For a moment, his weathered face remained expressionless. Then slowly, a smile spread across his features, the first truly warm expression she'd seen from him. "Well," he said, "I was wondering when you'd finally ask." Word of Elena's request to attempt the sniper school qualification spread through Blackstone with predictable speed. By evening, the news had reached every corner of the base, generating reactions that ranged from surprised approval to outright skepticism. Rico Mendoza's response was the loudest and most public. "Maintenance staff trying for sniper school? That's rich. What's next? The cook applying for special forces?" Elena kept her eyes on her tray, trying to ignore the ripple of laughter that followed his comment. At the table beside her, Jamie Torres bristled visibly. "Something funny about dedication and hard work?" Jamie called back, their voice sharp with indignation. "Nothing funny about knowing your place. Some of us have been training for this our entire careers. We've earned our positions through consistent performance, not one lucky shot." The mess hall had gone quiet, dozens of conversations stopping as people sensed drama brewing. Elena felt the weight of attention pressing down on her, the familiar urge to make herself small and invisible warring with something newer and more defiant. She stood up slowly, picking up her tray and walking over to Rico's table. His 3 companions watched her approach with expressions ranging from curiosity to amusement. Rico himself leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, the picture of arrogant confidence. "You're right about one thing," Elena said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "Some people have been training their entire careers, but training and talent aren't the same thing, are they?" Rico's smile faltered slightly. "Meaning what, exactly?" "Meaning that in 6 weeks, we'll both have the chance to prove what we're worth on the same range under the same conditions. May the best shooter win." She turned and walked away before Rico could respond, feeling the weight of every eye in the mess hall following her progress. At the exit, she paused and looked back. "Oh, and Rico, my grandfather always said that truly confident shooters let their targets do the talking." The mess hall erupted in murmurs and scattered laughter as Elena disappeared into the evening air, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration at what she'd just committed herself to. Jamie caught up with her outside, practically glowing with admiration. "That was amazing! Did you see his face?" "I probably shouldn't have said that," Elena replied, though part of her felt immensely satisfied with Rico's stunned expression. "Are you kidding? That was perfect! Someone needed to deflate his ego." Jamie fell into step beside her as they walked toward the barracks. "I've heard about your practice sessions with Harlow. People are saying you're improving faster than anyone's ever seen." Over the following weeks, the challenge Elena had issued became the talk of Blackstone.
Betting pools emerged, with odds heavily favoring Rico despite Elena's demonstrated abilities. The attention was both motivating and exhausting, turning every training session into a performance with invisible audiences. Master Sergeant Harlow seemed to relish the pressure, pushing Elena harder than ever before. Early morning sessions became a ritual, Dawn finding them on the range with coffee steaming in the cold air and targets waiting at increasingly challenging distances. "Pressure makes diamonds," he said one morning, after Elena had struggled through a particularly difficult wind-reading exercise. "But it can also crack glass. Which one are you going to be?" The question haunted Elena through the final weeks of preparation. She'd improved dramatically, her scores at various distances now consistently competitive with the top trainees. But consistency under training conditions was different from performance when everything was on the line.
Lieutenant Grace Rowe provided unexpected support, quietly arranging for Elena to have access to the range during off hours when she could practice without an audience. These solitary sessions became Elena's refuge, moments when she could reconnect with the meditative aspects of marksmanship that her grandfather had taught her. "Shooting is 90% mental," Grace observed one evening, finding Elena cleaning her rifle after a particularly productive practice session. "The physical skills plateau pretty quickly. After that, it's all about what's happening between your ears." "Sergeant Harlow says something similar," Elena replied, running a cleaning patch through the barrel with practiced efficiency. "Harlow's a good instructor, tough but fair. He wouldn't have recommended you for qualification if he didn't believe you could handle it." Grace paused, studying Elena with her characteristic directness. "The question is, do you believe it?" Elena considered the question as she reassembled her rifle. 6 months ago, she would have laughed at the suggestion that she could compete with elite military snipers. Now, after weeks of intensive training and steady improvement, the possibility seemed less absurd. "I think," she said carefully, "I believe I have a chance. Whether that's enough remains to be seen." Grace smiled, a rare expression of approval. "That's the right attitude. Confidence without arrogance. Hold on to that." 3 days before the qualification, Harlow pulled Elena aside after their morning session. "I want you to know," he said, "that regardless of what happens in the qualification, you've already proven something important. You've shown that talent exists in unexpected places and that dedication can bridge the gap between potential and performance." Elena felt a surge of gratitude toward this gruff man who'd taken a chance on her when he didn't have to. "Thank you, Sergeant, for everything." "Don't thank me yet," Harlow replied with a slight smile. "Thank me after you've shown Rico and everyone else what you're really capable of." Qualification day dawned gray and windy, with clouds scudding across the sky like scattered sheep and flags snapping crisply along the range. Elena stood among 24 candidates at the firing line, her borrowed BDUs crisp with starch and nervous energy radiating from every competitor. The sniper school qualification was legendary at Blackstone, a series of increasingly difficult shots that tested every aspect of marksmanship under pressure. The course began at 400 yards and progressed through 600, 800, and finally, the notorious 1,000-yard shot that had broken more careers than any other single challenge in the military. Master Sergeant Harlow addressed the group with his characteristic directness. "Today you'll fire 40 rounds at 4 different distances. Each stage eliminates the bottom 20%. If you're still standing after the 1,000-yard line, you've earned your place in the program." Elena felt her mouth go dry. She'd assumed everyone would get to attempt all 4 distances, not realizing that elimination was built into the process. Around her, the other candidates shifted nervously, the reality of the challenge suddenly more concrete. Rico Mendoza stood 3 positions to her right, his equipment arranged with military precision and his expression radiating quiet confidence. He'd shot perfect scores in the practice qualifications, his reputation as the presumptive class leader well established among the candidates. "Shooters to the line." The 400-yard stage felt almost easy after weeks of training at longer distances. Elena's 10 shots grouped tightly in the center of the target, her score of 96 points placing her solidly in the middle of the pack. Rico scored a perfect 100, as expected, though several other candidates matched his performance. As they moved to the 600-yard line, Elena noticed whispered conversations and sidelong glances from her fellow competitors. Her presence had been controversial enough when she'd first registered for the qualification, but her solid performance at 400 yards had elevated her from curiosity to potential threat. The wind had picked up for the second stage, flags dancing with increasing complexity along the range. Elena studied the conditions carefully, remembering Harlow's lessons about reading the entire bullet's flight path rather than just the conditions at the firing line. Her first shot at 600 yards went slightly high, catching the 9 ring at 12 o'clock. The second found the X ring, and the third matched it. By the end of the string, she'd posted a score of 94. Good enough to advance, but behind Rico's 98. "Nice shooting," murmured the candidate beside her, a tall sergeant named Williams who'd been consistently friendly despite the competitive atmosphere. "Thank you. You too." As scores were tallied and posted, Elena watched 5 candidates pack their gear and walk away from the firing line. The elimination was swift and final, their disappointed faces a stark reminder of what failure looked like in this environment. The 800-yard stage was where Elena had made her reputation, and she felt her familiar calm settle over her as she took position. This was the distance where she'd first shocked everyone, where her grandfather's patient instruction had translated into modern success.
The conditions were challenging. Gusty wind with variable direction and the afternoon sun creating complex mirage patterns that made the targets dance like mirages. Elena took her time with each shot, reading the wind flags and waiting for the brief moments of stability that would give her the best chance for precision. Her string started well with an X-ring hit, followed by 2 solid 9s. The fourth shot caught the edge of the 8-ring, a reminder that even familiar distances could humble a shooter under pressure. But her final 6 shots found their marks consistently, building to a score of 92 that kept her in contention. Rico's score was 96, maintaining his lead but by a smaller margin than before. As Elena studied the scoreboard, she realized she was now in 4th place overall, well within range of advancing to the final stage. Another 5 candidates were eliminated, their equipment bags slung over shoulders as they walked away from dreams that had ended at 800 yards. Elena felt a mixture of relief and growing pressure. She'd made it farther than anyone had expected, but the most difficult challenge still lay ahead. "Final stage," Harlow announced as the remaining candidates prepared for the 1,000-yard line. 10 shots at 1,000 yards. Wind is gusting to 15 miles per hour with variable direction. Only the top 10 scores advance to sniper school. Elena felt her heart rate spike as the implications became clear. It wasn't enough to simply hit the target anymore. She had to outshoot seasoned professionals who'd been training for this moment their entire careers. As she settled into position at the 1,000-yard line, the target seemed to disappear entirely in the dancing mirage. The wind flags told a complex story of shifting currents, and the afternoon sun created heat distortions that made precise aiming nearly impossible. Rico fired first in our relay, his shots methodical and confident. Through her peripheral vision, Elena could see his spotting scope operator calling hits in the high-scoring rings. The pressure of following such a performance was immense, but she forced herself to focus on her own fundamentals rather than anyone else's success. The first shot felt good leaving the barrel, but the spotter called it low, a 7 at 6 o'clock. Elena made a small elevation adjustment and fired again. This time the bullet found the 9 ring, and she felt her confidence begin to build. Shot by shot, she worked her way through the string, reading conditions and making tiny adjustments based on each bullet's impact. The wind seemed to settle slightly for her final 3 shots, and she took advantage of the calmer conditions to post 2 9s and an 8. When the final scores were tallied, Elena stared at the board in disbelief. Her 87 points had placed her 9th overall, 1 position away from elimination, but safely qualified for sniper school.
Rico had won the competition with a score of 94, his margin of victory smaller than anyone had predicted. As Rico accepted congratulations from the other qualifiers, his eyes found Elena across the firing line. For a moment, his expression was unreadable. Then, surprisingly, he nodded once, a gesture that might have been acknowledgement, or possibly respect. Elena looked down at her hands, still steady despite the magnitude of what had just happened. In the span of a few hours, she'd gone from maintenance staff to qualified sniper candidate, earning her place through pure marksmanship rather than connections or reputation. As she packed her equipment, Elena thought of her grandfather and wondered what he would have made of this moment. Somewhere in the Alaskan wilderness, his patient teachings had taken root in ways neither of them could have imagined. The real work was just beginning. 3 weeks into sniper school, Elena stood at the edge of what Master Sergeant Harlow called the separator, the 1,200-yard line that divided competent marksmen from true snipers. The morning air carried the bite of autumn, and frost glittered on the grass around the firing positions like scattered diamonds. Today's exercise would determine class rankings and assignments for advanced training. The top 3 shooters would receive recommendations for specialized schools and potential deployment opportunities. The bottom 3 would be recycled through basic training or reassigned entirely. Elena checked her equipment one final time, her movements deliberate and calm despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. Over the past weeks, she'd proven herself capable of keeping pace with the elite candidates. But 1,200 yards represented a distance she'd attempted only twice before, both times with mixed results. Rico Mendoza occupied the firing position 2 lanes to her right. His custom rifle gleamed in the pale sunlight. His performance throughout the school had been flawless, his technical knowledge encyclopedic, his confidence absolute. The gap between first and second place had remained consistent, until yesterday.
Yesterday, Elena had posted a score at 1,000 yards that had closed the gap to just 3 points. Today's shoot would be decisive. Shooters to the line. Elena settled into her prone position, feeling the familiar weight of the rifle distribute across her body. Through her scope, the target wavered in the distance like a mirage, 1,200 yards of air distortion and wind currents standing between her and the small black circle that would determine her future. The wind was particularly challenging this morning, gusting from multiple directions with velocities that changed by the minute. Elena studied the flags positioned at 300-yard intervals, each one telling part of a complex story about the invisible river of air her bullet would navigate. At 300 yards, the flag hung nearly limp. At 600, it snapped briskly from the northwest. At 900, it showed a quartering wind from the east. The target flag danced erratically, suggesting swirling currents that would make precise shot placement extremely difficult. "Take your time," Master Sergeant Harlow said quietly from behind the spotting scope. "Read the conditions. Trust your instincts." Elena closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself in the techniques her grandfather had taught her in the Alaskan wilderness. "When the shot gets difficult," Henry Park's voice whispered from memory, "the fundamentals become even more important. Breathe, aim, squeeze, follow through. Everything else is just noise." She opened her eyes and found her sight picture, the crosshairs settling naturally on her chosen point of aim. The winds seemed to settle momentarily, the flags hanging straighter than they had all morning. Elena began her breathing cycle, letting her body settle into perfect stillness. The shot broke cleanly, surprising her with the timing as the trigger reached its release point. Through her scope, she watched the bullet's vapor trail streak downrange, the projectile riding the complex air currents toward the distant target. "Hit," Harlow called quietly. 9 ring, 11 o'clock. Elena felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with determination. A 9 at 1,200 yards was a solid shot, but she knew Rico was capable of better.
She needed to push beyond solid into exceptional territory. Her second shot felt even better, the rifle settling naturally into position as she found her rhythm. This time the spotter called an X-ring hit, and Elena allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. Shot by shot, she worked through her string of 10 rounds, reading each wind change and making tiny adjustments based on the feedback from previous impacts. The world narrowed to the scope picture, the trigger press, and the distant target that seemed to grow more cooperative with each passing shot. When Harlow called her final impact, another X-ring hit, Elena realized she'd just fired the string of her life. The accumulated score would be close to perfect, certainly her best performance at this extreme distance. "Outstanding shooting," Harlow said as she cleared her rifle and began gathering her equipment. That was textbook precision under difficult conditions. 20 minutes later, the results were posted on the scoreboard near the range office. Elena found her name in the number 2 position, her score of 93 points representing a personal best at 1,200 yards. Rico's name occupied the familiar first position, but his score was only 94 points. 1 point. After months of competition and weeks of intensive training, the gap between them had narrowed to a single point. But the competition wasn't over yet. "Final exercise," Harlow announced to the assembled candidates. "Single shot at 1,200 yards, sudden death elimination. Miss the target entirely and you're out. Lowest score among those who hit the target goes home." Elena felt her pulse quicken as the implications became clear. Everything, her qualification for advanced training, her standing in the class, her entire future as a sniper would come down to one shot. Rico fired first, his movements smooth and confident as always. The spotter's call echoed across the range. 10 ring, 2 o'clock. A solid shot that would be difficult to beat. Elena stepped to the line feeling the weight of expectation and opportunity in equal measure. Around her, the other candidates watched in silence, understanding that they were witnessing something significant. Elena settled into position and began her preparation ritual, checking her natural point of aim and adjusting for the current wind conditions. The flags told a slightly different story now. The wind had shifted more to the south, requiring a different hold than she'd been using all morning. As she found her sight picture, Elena's mind went quiet in the way it had learned to do under pressure. The mechanical aspects of marksmanship, breathing, trigger control, follow-through, became automatic, freeing her consciousness to focus on the subtle environmental clues that would guide her bullet to the target.
The crosshairs settled on her chosen point of aim, and Elena began the final phase of her breathing cycle. Halfway out, hold, squeeze straight back with steadily increasing pressure until... The rifle recoiled against her shoulder with familiar authority. Through her scope, Elena watched the vapor trail streak down range, riding the shifting air currents with what seemed like predetermined inevitability toward the distant target. For a moment that stretched like eternity, the range fell silent, except for the whisper of wind through the grass. Then the spotter's voice cut through the quiet with words that would change everything. "X-ring, dead center." Elena remained in position for several seconds, hardly daring to believe what she'd heard. Around her, she could hear whispered conversations and the scratch of pencils as scores were calculated and verified. When she finally rose from the firing line, Master Sergeant Harlow was waiting with an expression she'd never seen before, something that might have been pride mixed with genuine amazement. 95 points, he said quietly. Class leader. For the first time since arriving at Blackstone, Elena Park, former maintenance staff, overlooked cleaner, reluctant competitor, stood at the top of the scoreboard ahead of every elite candidate who'd trained their entire careers for this moment. Rico Mendoza appeared beside the scoring table, his face a careful mask of professional composure. He extended his hand toward Elena, his grip firm and his eyes holding something that might have been respect. "Good shooting," he said simply. "You earned it." The morning after her victory, Elena woke to find a manila envelope slipped under her barracks door. Inside was an official letter bearing the seal of the U.S. Army Marksmanship Unit, inviting her to compete in the National Long Range Championship, a competition that drew the finest military and civilian shooters from across the country. Holy shit, Jamie Torres breathed when Elena showed them the letter over breakfast. The Nationals? That's huge, Elena. Only the absolute best get invited to that. Elena stared at the letterhead, still processing the reality of what had happened over the past few weeks. A month ago, she was invisible maintenance staff. Now she held invitations to competitions she'd only read about in magazines. It says here they'll cover travel and accommodations, she read out loud. 3 days of competition at Camp Perry, Ohio. Long-range rifle events from 600 to 1,000 yards. The news had spread through Blackstone with typical military efficiency. Elena found herself the subject of conversations that stopped when she entered rooms, the recipient of nods and congratulations from instructors who'd barely acknowledged her existence before her qualification. Master Sergeant Harlow found her cleaning her rifle in the armory that afternoon, a task that had become both meditation and celebration in the wake of her success. "Quite a week," he said, settling onto a nearby stool. "Yes, Sergeant. Still processing it all, honestly. I've been thinking about your progression. 6 months ago, you were support staff. Now you're receiving invitations to national competitions. That kind of trajectory is, unusual." Elena paused in her cleaning routine, sensing something significant in his tone. "I've made a recommendation," he said, "for you to attend the Advanced Sniper course at Fort Benning. It's a highly specialized program, only 12 candidates per class, invitation only." The cleaning rod slipped from Elena's fingers, clattering against the metal workbench. The Advanced Sniper course was legendary in military circles, producing the elite shooters who went on to special operations units and international competitions. "Sergeant, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll consider it. The next class starts in 3 months. That gives you time to compete at Camp Perry and see how you measure against the national field." Harlow's weathered face carried an expression of quiet satisfaction. "Your grandfather would be proud, I think." Later that evening, Elena found herself walking the perimeter of the base, needing space to process the magnitude of how her life had changed. The autumn air carried the scent of distant fires and the first hint of winter, and the familiar sound of evening training exercises echoed from the ranges. Lieutenant Grace Rowe intercepted her near the main gate, tablet in hand, but expression unusually relaxed. "Heard about the Advanced Sniper recommendation. Congratulations. Harlow doesn't make those lightly." "Thank you, ma'am. Though I'm still not sure I'm ready for something like that." Grace studied her with characteristic directness. "Can I share something with you? When I first arrived at Blackstone, I was assigned to logistics because someone decided women were better suited for support roles than combat positions. It took me 3 years and several minor miracles to prove them wrong." Elena nodded, understanding the parallels. "The point is," Grace continued, "opportunities like this don't come around often, and they certainly don't come around for people who aren't ready for them. Trust the process that got you here."
The next morning brought another surprise. Rico Mendoza appeared at the armory door during Elena's usual equipment check, his expression serious but not hostile. "Got a minute?" he asked. Elena gestured to an empty stool, curious about what had brought him here. "I owe you an apology," Rico said, without preamble. "I was an ass when you first started training, made assumptions based on prejudice, I guess." "You weren't the only one," Elena replied honestly. "Maybe not, but I was the loudest about it." He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation, but determined to see it through. "What you did yesterday, that shot under pressure, with everything on the line, that was impressive. More than impressive." Elena felt an unexpected warmth at the acknowledgement. Rico's approval meant more than she'd realized, perhaps because it had been so hard-won. "I wanted to ask you something," Rico continued. "That national competition, I got an invitation too. Would you be interested in training together, sharing techniques, spotting for each other?" The offer surprised Elena. A month ago, Rico had barely acknowledged her existence. Now he was proposing a partnership that would benefit them both. "I'd like that," she said. "I could use someone who understands the pressure of high-level competition." Rico smiled,
the first genuine expression of friendship she'd seen from him. Good, because honestly, I could learn a few things about staying calm under pressure. As the days passed, Elena found herself adapting to her new status at Blackstone. Trainees who'd once dismissed her now sought her advice on wind reading and shot placement. Instructors included her in technical discussions that had previously been reserved for the elite candidates. Jamie Torres had submitted their own application for sniper school, inspired by Elena's example to pursue opportunities they'd previously considered out of reach. "You showed all of us something important," Jamie said one evening as they walked back from the mess hall. "That excellence can come from unexpected places, that dedication matters more than pedigree." Elena thought about the observation as she prepared for sleep that night. In her footlocker, beside the competition invitation and recommendation letters, she kept a faded photograph of her grandfather taken during his army service. His patient teachings in the Alaskan wilderness had planted seeds that had taken years to bloom, but when opportunity finally arrived, the foundation was solid. Tomorrow she would begin preparing for the national championships, taking her skills to a level she'd never imagined possible. But tonight, she allowed herself a quiet moment of satisfaction at how far she had already come. 6 weeks later, Elena stood in the pre-dawn darkness of Camp Perry firing line, her breath visible in the crisp Ohio air as she prepared for the final day of the National Long Range Championship. Around her, the finest marksmen in the country made their own preparations, their movements efficient and focused in the way that marked true professionals. The past month and a half had been a whirlwind of intensive training, travel arrangements, and media attention that Elena still struggled to comprehend. Her story, maintenance staff turned national competitor, had captured the imagination of shooting sports enthusiasts across the country, generating interviews and feature articles that felt surreal to someone who'd spent most of her life avoiding the spotlight. "Nervous?" Rico Mendasa asked as he set up his equipment at the adjacent firing point. True to his word, he'd become a training partner and genuine friend, their shared preparation for the Nationals building a mutual respect that transcended their earlier rivalry. "Focused," Elena replied, checking her rifle 01 final time. "Grandfather always said nerves were just excitement wearing a disguise." The competition had been challenging beyond anything Elena had experienced. 3 days of shooting in conditions that ranged from dead calm to gusting crosswinds, against opponents who'd been competing at this level for decades. She'd held her own admirably, finishing in the top 10 overall and earning recognition as the competition's breakthrough performer. More importantly, she'd proven to herself that her success at Blackstone wasn't a fluke. Under pressure, against the best competitors in the country, her fundamentals had remained solid and her confidence had grown rather than waver. As the morning progressed toward the final relay, Elena found herself in 3rd place overall, a position that seemed impossible when viewed against the trajectory of her life just months earlier. Win or lose, she had already exceeded every expectation, except perhaps her own. Master Sergeant Harlow had made the trip to Camp Perry, ostensibly as an observer, but clearly invested in Elena's performance. He approached her position during a break between relays, his expression carrying the quiet satisfaction of a teacher watching a student exceed all expectations. "How are you feeling about the advanced sniper course?" Elena had officially accepted the invitation the week before, committing to 3 months of intensive training that would take her shooting skills to an entirely new level. "Ready," she said simply. "More ready than I've ever been for anything." "Good, because I've got some news that might interest you." Harlow pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "Invitation came through this morning. international competition in Germany next spring. They're looking for 2 U.S. Army representatives. Elena stared at the paper, hardly believing what she was reading. An international competition would represent the pinnacle of military marksmanship, drawing competitors from elite units around the world. "They want me?" she asked, incredulous. "They want the 2 highest-performing graduates from the next advanced sniper course," Harlow clarified. "Nothing's guaranteed, but you've got as good a chance as anyone." As the final relay began, Elena felt a deep sense of calm settle over her. Whether she finished 3rd or 10th at this competition no longer mattered as much as the fact that she'd proven herself capable of belonging at this level. The shy maintenance tech who'd fired that first record shot seemed like someone from another lifetime, replaced by a confident competitor who'd earned her place through skill and determination. Her final string of shots was perhaps the best of the competition. 9 hits in the 10 ring and an X ring to finish, posting a score that moved her into 2nd place overall and earning applause from competitors who'd initially viewed her as a curiosity. As she packed her equipment for the journey back to Blackstone, Elena discovered a handwritten note tucked into her rifle case. The paper was worn and yellowed, the handwriting familiar despite the years that had passed since she'd last seen it. "Elena, don't do it halfway. The only limitations that matter are the ones you accept. Your potential is limitless if you have the courage to chase it. Grandfather." She'd kept the note in her old hunting gear, forgotten until her mother had mailed it along with other mementos after learning about Elena's competition success. Reading it now, she could almost hear Henry Park's patient voice and see his calm smile as he watched her take aim at targets that once seemed impossibly distant. Lieutenant Grace Rowe met her at the Blackstone gate upon her return, tablet in hand, but expression warmer than Elena had ever seen. "2nd place at Nationals. Outstanding performance. How does it feel to be one of the best marksmen in the country?" Elena considered the question as they walked toward the main building. 6 months ago, she would have deflected such praise, minimized her accomplishments, and focused on her limitations. Now she felt capable of owning her success without arrogance. "Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," she said honestly. As evening settled over Blackstone, Elena found herself back in the armory where her journey had begun, cleaning and maintaining the rifles that had become extensions of her own capabilities. But now, the space felt different, not like a hiding place, but like a sanctuary where precision and patience were valued above pretension and politics. Jamie Torres appeared in the doorway, wearing the insignia of a newly qualified sniper school candidate. Their acceptance had come through during Elena's absence, another small victory in the chain of inspiration that Elena's success had set in motion. "Heard about Germany," Jamie said, settling onto their usual stool. "International competition, that's incredible. Still have to earn it, but yes, it's an amazing opportunity. You know what the best part is? Every woman on this base who's ever been told she doesn't belong somewhere now has proof that excellence trumps expectations." Elena paused in her work, struck by the weight of what Jamie was saying. Her individual success had created ripples that extended far beyond her own career, opening doors and changing perceptions in ways she was only beginning to understand. As she finished her equipment maintenance and prepared to leave the armory, Elena took a moment to appreciate how the space had transformed around her. Where she had once felt invisible and overlooked, she now felt purposeful and valued. The rifles in their racks represented not just tools of precision, but instruments of possibility, each one capable of remarkable performance in the right hands. She turned off the lights and stepped into the evening air, breathing deeply of the familiar sense of cordite and determination that defined Blackstone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to push the boundaries of what seemed possible. But tonight, Elena Park, former maintenance staff, unlikely champion, and future international competitor, allowed herself to smile at how far she had traveled from those first hesitant shots to this moment of unlimited potential. The journey was just beginning, and she intended to make the most of every mile.
Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.